دمص وصعات
عدات ساتلايت تلفزيون ኤሪሳት ናብ ሃገረ ካናዳን ሕብራት መንግስታት ኣሜሪካን كما ኣጻልተናይቲ ኣብ ኣሜሪካ ዝገበርናዮ عدات ኤሪሳት ኣብ ሓንቲ ከተማ ሕብራት መንግስታት ኣሜሪካን ኣብ ሰለስተ ከተማታት ካናዳን ማለት ዊኒፒግ ሚያዝያ 22 ሚኒያፖሊስ ሚኔሶታ 23 ሚያዝያ ኤድመንተን ሚያዝያ 19 ከምኡ ድማ ኣብ ቶሮንቶ ሚያዝያ 30 2023 عدات ክንገብር ኢና كلكم دليت فتحي أبزن كتماتاتن كوابين زلكم أبتن نجبرو نائهن مهن مدرخ مسانا حبيركم كتوعلو بخبرنا الدم بدحان متسو ساتلايت تلفزيون ኤሪሳት
بمعرنت كله نقول ساتفا سنوك فتح السلام حدنت حقيفا عم فتكت مأزن رأي كتسسن دمتكم سمعوا مقالح كنوا ኤሪሳት
Greetings everyone, I am Stefanos and this is Erisat's The Power of One program. Mr. Sajid Nadeem is my guest today. Sajid is an analyst of the Horn of Africa, and as most of you may have seen his commentaries before. And I've invited him here today to share his perspective on what's going on in our region. So Sajid, welcome. And thank you for being here. To get us started, Sajid, can you tell our audience briefly a little bit about your background and what got you interested in the Horn of Africa in the first place?
Thank you for having me, Mr. Tavalde. Erisat is doing a wonderful job for Eritreans. Obviously, Eritreans have right to information, which is restricted in Eritrea. As regards your question about my background, my interest in Eritrea, I launched the YouTube channel My Views on News around 4 years ago. Basically, I was interested in learning about and covering international conflicts, armed conflicts. Afghanistan war was the first war, did some videos, then on Palestine, Iran-US relations. After that, Turkey-Syria war broke out. I covered that. Then in Libya, an internal war broke out. Turkey was involved there. I covered that. After the Azerbaijan-Armenia war, 44-day long war, I covered. And then I think 2 or 3 days after a peace agreement was signed between Azerbaijan and Armenia in Russia, I started covering internal war in Ethiopia, civil war, where there was involvement of Eritrean military as well. So that brought me to the Horn of Africa. My quest for covering international conflicts took me to the Horn of Africa. And since you cannot cover Ethiopian developments without understanding Eritrean role, both were part of one country in the past. So gradually, I started learning about Eritrean involvement, their history, their culture, and it was interesting. It was interesting to learn about what is happening in this part of the region. And gradually, I succeeded in having a team of volunteers who started supporting me in terms of sharing of information. And I never lost interest in this region, though I do almost 4 or 5 videos a day on My Views and News. But so much is happening, so much should be told to the people of the Horn of Africa that every day there are new developments which keep me interested in this region.
So, are you a journalist by profession, Sajid?
I am not a journalist. I have worked in law enforcement agencies. I have worked in some intelligence agencies. It was my passion to cover international conflicts through YouTube, through this platform. I got this opportunity. Gradually, I learned on the job, you can say, through my channel and through feedback from viewers. I think viewers, they backed me a lot. They corrected me a lot. Still, I learn from them.
There's a lot of action in the countries you comment on, Sajid. Unfortunately, mostly bad because of the wars and the famines and other kinds of turmoil. How often do you travel to the region, if you do? And then how well do you understand local languages to get a first-hand perspective of the events that you cover?
I haven't traveled to the Horn of Africa. I haven't been to Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia, ever, firstly. Secondly, as I said earlier, I have a team of volunteers now because I need to get translations from different languages. Information is coming in Amharic, in Tigrinya, in Afan Oromo, in Somali. And I have people who work for me without any financial benefit. They just work for me as volunteers. And through research, through studying, through interaction with people, almost all day I am busy on Twitter, on WhatsApp, on Facebook, on Telegram, on YouTube, in comment section. Lots of people have my personal number. They stay in touch, video calls. So it's not difficult to learn about a region in this era. Especially, it was almost impossible to enter Ethiopia when the war was going on there in Tigray. Tigray was under siege. No one was allowed to enter or leave Tigray. So it was almost impossible to cover the war by being on the ground. So whoever did videos on the war in Tigray did videos remaining outside the war zone. They relied on distant reporting through interviews, through video conferences, through meetings, through relying on official sources, on verbal evidence. It was a unique war to cover, by the way, Tigray war, because everything was cut off. Internet, no banking, no mobile networks, nothing was allowed to enter. No one was allowed to leave. It was very difficult. It was a challenge to cover this war, because when I covered Azerbaijan-Armenia war, Turkey, Syria, Libya war, we got lots of support in terms of pictures, videos, in terms of information on the ground. But this Tigray war was a challenge. But luckily, with the help of volunteers, supporters from all sides, we succeeded to some extent in having a clear picture of what was happening and what is happening on the ground in Ethiopia. Eritrea is still difficult to get information from, because there are so many restrictions that it's a challenge to get accurate information from Eritrea even now.
So I think you touched on that. So I mean, all the governments in the region are not known for their transparency or for allowing independent media to operate freely. So you mentioned the volunteers as a source of information. Any other sources, like, I don't know, anonymous diplomatic sources, international organizations, think tank sources, in addition to the volunteers that provide you information? Do you use any other sources, that credible sources like that?
Definitely. My views and views is vast in diplomatic circles. People contact me from aid organizations, from embassies. Official representatives stay in touch with me. I cannot disclose any names.
Of course.
But it's a team. It's a team which helps me, which keeps me on the right track, I would say. And luckily, I'm in touch with people from all sides. I mean, if I am covering a development in Tigray, which has different players involved, I try to take all of them on board. I take their positions. Since I talk to all of them, and somehow they trust me a little bit, I would say. By the way, it's easy for me to get the information. Volunteers help me in terms of verifying the information, in terms of getting translations, in terms of getting the background, historical background. But you cannot rely on one source, especially when you are covering a conflict area, you cannot rely on one source. You must have multiple sources. That is how we get the whole picture of what is happening on the
level. As you mentioned, the Tigray war, which Eritrea participated in, was devastating. Hundreds of thousands of people killed. Both Eritrea and Ethiopia are poor countries, as you know, to begin with, and yet they were importing this very expensive military equipment whose sole job was to cause more destruction, deepening the poverty and weakening the economies of both countries. So do you think there were winners in this debacle, even if it can even be called that? Or was it a lose-lose, a game all around? What are your thoughts on that?
No one wins in a war, I think. Yeah. That is what my position has been since day one, that there will be no winner in this war. And no one is a winner. What did Eritrea gain from this war? Poverty, isolation, killing of their soldiers. What did Ethiopia gain from this war? Nothing. Hatred, death, misery, destruction. Their economy in trouble. Their military is in disarray. Hatred between the ethnic groups all-time high. So what did the two countries get from this war? Nothing. Basically, the war was a failure. I would say the war was a failure of the ruling elite's capability to rule their countries. Ruling elite in Ethiopia could not resolve their issues. Political elite through dialogue, it was a failure of their abilities. It was a failure of Eritrean government's ability as well, that it could not handle its disputes with the Tigray, border issues, other issues with Ethiopia through dialogue. War is always a failure of diplomacy, politics. It's nothing to brag about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do you think the ruling elites, as you put it, realized, even in hindsight, the amount of damage that they have caused on their countries and their populations? Do you think they've learned anything from this, or are they going to do it all over again in a few years?
Let's hope, but it's too early to say. Have they learned any lessons? It's too early, because what you have seen is that Eritrean government is bragging that game over. Is this the way of learning a lesson? If you are trying to humiliate your rivals, Ethiopian government is trying to implement the peace deal, Pretoria deal, but still there are other issues in the country. Core issues are unresolved, like the issues between the federation and the government, issues between ethnic groups, issues, lots of other issues too. So we cannot say lessons have been learned, because now I think everyone was tired. That is why war came to an end. Tigrayans, they were under a siege for around 2 years, death, misery, death from hunger. They thought it should be ended, I think. Otherwise, appetite for war will only end if there are diplomatic, transparent, democratic mechanisms established for conflict resolution within a country and between countries. Any mechanism? No. Has Ethiopia established any mechanism for resolution of internal conflict? What about Ethiopia? Have they agreed on some common principles? I haven't heard so far about the war. So it's too early to say, but so far, at least guns have been silenced.
So mostly from being tired rather than from the realization that, they were causing so much damage, unfortunately. Yeah. So Sajid, many countries depend on aid to subsidize their budgets in the countries that you cover, which makes them more accountable to outside forces at the expense of the needs of their citizens. How much of their budget is covered by foreign aid or other international instruments which makes them dependent on that kind of finances rather than solving their problems in a sustainable way. So do you know if any of the countries actually fund their budgets fully from their own resources?
Somalia, dependent on foreign aid. Ethiopia, largest recipient of US and other countries' aid. Eritrea has a different case. These countries are dependent on foreign aid, whether they receive it directly or whether they receive it through aid organizations. They depend on aid. And when they depend on aid, it means that they are vulnerable to foreign interference.
Exactly.
We cannot deny that, through aid organizations, people enter in countries. Since I stay in touch with aid organizations, I know what they do on the ground in these countries. They collect information about the areas which they should not. Their jobs are multiple apart from the humanitarian work. But no one should blame outsiders. If Ethiopia, Somalia are dependent on aid, no one should blame EU, US, or UN. I think the rulers should be held accountable. Absolutely. Why couldn't they create aid-free economy? See what is happening in Ethiopia, that Ethiopian government is badly in need of financial aid at this point of time. Ethiopian government wants rescheduling of its loan payments. It is in talks with IMF, with World Bank. Ahmad Shide was in China a few days ago for loan payment rescheduling. PM Abiy was in France. And World Bank deputy was in Ethiopia, I think 2 days ago. And you might have seen the disparity between birr's rate in open market and its official exchange rate, birr to dollar. So lots of issues, but these countries depend on aid. And that is why they're vulnerable to foreign interference too.
Absolutely. Another form of this foreign dependency is there are reports that say Ethiopia has leased some of the fertile land as agricultural projects to the Gulf states for 99 years. And 100% of whatever is produced there is going to be sent outside, ignoring the needs of the local populations. What do you know about this? Is this true? If it is, to what extent is that true? Because, if something like that is going on, in essence, it's also losing a little bit of your sovereignty at a time, isn't it?
I have no credible information to share with you that the country has sold its lands. But as I said earlier, foreign aid comes at a cost. This is, by the way, Eritrean government's position, that foreign aid comes at a cost. Though Eritrean government's position on aid can be debated too, because it receives aid, indirect aid maybe. But aid organizations, countries, they have their agendas. They want their footing, and somehow they achieve their objectives through through investments in different areas. Labor is cheap in this part of the world. Their investments mature early. They have lots of other areas from which they can benefit from when it comes to investing in these countries.
You mentioned the Pretoria Peace Agreement earlier. I think it's on its 6 months now, half-year mark is approaching. So the TPLF has been taken off the terrorist list, but there are a lot of Amhara parties that are not happy about that. So what are your thoughts on how durable this peace is going to be, both for the short term and the long term? Do you think it will hold?
So far it is holding because, as I said earlier, Tigray lost appetite for war. Tigray suffered so much that it was not in a position to continue the war. They were under siege. They were finding it difficult to get public support. People were dying. So they had to make some concessions. But Pretoria deal has not resolved internal Ethiopian issues between Tigray and Amhara. And apart from Tigray and Amhara, Oromo, not a new, but it's an old phenomena again being seen. Their rivalry for dominance is now on the cards. Tigray, Amhara core issues are unresolved, especially about their claims to Raya and Volkayet. The two areas, southern and western zones, which were part of Tigray before the start of the war, but now they're under the control of Amhara forces and Ethiopian National Defense Force. How will PM Abiy handle this dispute between these two regions? That remains to be seen. I don't see imminent resumption of war, by the way. Peace deal will hold. But as I said earlier, for lasting peace, you need to have some fundamental changes in terms of resetting of relations between federation and region to different ethnic groups, opening up of space for political parties, for opposition parties. Nothing is happening. Only guns have been silenced. Tigrayans, tired with the war, they are trying to rebuild their region. Interim setup is being put in place. And core issues between Tigray and Eritrea unresolved. Their border demarcation not done. Their ruling of 2 decades old is still not enforced. Eritrean military withdrawn, but not completely. Just 2 days ago, Getachew said that the military was still in parts of Tigray. So you see that peace deal is being implemented, but core issues are unresolved. And for the core issues to be resolved, these arch rivals, Tigrayans and Eritreans, Tigrayans and Amharas, they'll have to sit at the table. Will they do it? No signs so far, but no signs of the resumption of conflict as well. So for lasting peace, they'll have to sit at the table. So far, gun silence. So far, no signs of resumption of the war in coming days, weeks, or even months, I think.
So focusing on Eritrea, Sajid, the quality of decision-making in totalitarian regimes is poor to begin with because it depends on one person. And I think it gets worse as that one person gets older. As we saw in Isaias's latest interview, which I think you commented on as well. So he didn't appear to be talking as a person in charge, but as a distant observer, essentially, an analyst like you. Were you surprised that the very person in charge is also the one confirming Eritrea is pretty much a failed state, while taking no responsibility that he is the one who made it so? Was that surprising to you?
First of all, whether you are old or young, no one man can rule a country. Countries are ruled by institutions, by a team, and opposition, government, all play their parts in providing services for the betterment of the people. One-man rule is always associated with ills, with wrong decisions, with lots of other issues. Whether he is old or not, it's not an issue. Problem is that there is no institution which is making joint decisions. And importantly, those who are making decisions, can they be held accountable in Eritrea or not? No one knows any mechanism through judiciary, through protests, through parliament, if there is a parliament, through constitution. There is no such mechanism. It means that those in power, they are doing whatever they want to do without any accountability. And they're not taking responsibility for their decisions. I said in that analysis of Sajid's interview that maybe he thinks like a guerrilla fighter now. after 30, more than 30 years of the end of guerrilla war. His way of thinking is like that of a guerrilla fighter, like he is focused on security, and so much focused on security that other issues which matter a lot for common Eritreans, they're being neglected. And does he have the capability to make decisions about economy, to make decisions about developing? It is also very important question. Yes, he knows regional politics very well. He knows the security atmosphere very well. But what people need is developing. Does he have the capability?
Yeah. As you mentioned earlier, Sajid, I mean, Eritrea has no institutions, and it hasn't had a budget in its entire history as an independent nation. There is no succession plan. Pretty much a failed state, as Isaias himself confirmed. Now, as hopeless as it seems, it's also a small country with sufficient resources that can be turned around rather quickly if the will is there. It's not like Ethiopia, a huge ship that will be difficult to turn around. Now, there is a possibility this quick turnaround can be also in the wrong direction, like Libya, for example. But let's be optimistic and assume that it can be in the right direction. So the question for you, Sajid, is what do you think are the necessary steps Eritreans should take now to maximize the chances that the chances of the desirable outcome, the optimistic one?
Firstly, I think now Eritrea is in a transitional mode because for decades Isaias Afwerki used TPLF to scare Eritreans, to cover up his performance. Now he himself says game over. It means now he'll have to make some decisions. Diaspora, Eritreans abroad, they'll ask valid questions that what is the threat to Eritrea now? You've been saying for years that Eritrea was under threat, Ethiopia, TPL was after Eritrea, now game over. So this is a phase of transition for Eritrea. Will Isaias Afwerki government change its course or not? Or will he remain preoccupied with security? We'll see in coming weeks, months, I would say. So we'll have to give little time to the government. Will government change its course? By the way, Eritreans I talk to are hopeless. They say this government will never change its course. It will work the way working for decades. It will not bring about any change. But we'll have to wait because war has come to a close. Maybe the government has realized that it should work for Eritreans. We don't know. Your question that what should Eritreans do? What can Eritreans do in Eritrea? They are not in a position to challenge this government. No opposition, no media, no political parties. They cannot organize themselves. They'll be put in prison. They cannot launch any political struggle, which they're entitled to. But Eritrean diaspora can play a key role. Eritrean economy depends on foreign remittances. International players can play a part, but they are divided. You know that China, Russia supporting Eritrean government, US, EU, they put sanctions on the government. They keep on criticizing the government. So internationally, maybe it's difficult to get an international coalition against Eritrea. But I personally think that Eritrean diaspora should play a positive role. They shouldn't be anti-Isaias. They should speak for poor Eritreans. They should ask valid questions. That what is Isaias Afwerki government's plan to change the course? And is this plan doable? And if you remember, in his last part of the interview, he tried to address this issue a little because there was pressure coming on Isaias Afwerki from pro-government diaspora members who were asking valid questions that Isaias Afwerki was disappointing in his interview about local issues. In the last part, he tried to address this issue by saying that economy will be opened up. But I think diaspora should continue its pressure upon the government. These opposition groups abroad, they can play a role if they are united, but you know what is happening, that there are lots of groups backed by different parties.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. So whatever Ethiopia ends up being, it's going to influence the whole area. So a quick question about Abiy. Being half Amhara, half Oromo, half Christian, half Muslim, I think he had, sufficient unifying attributes in one person that could have taken Ethiopia, in a much brighter future. Unfortunately, he turned out to be a divisive figure, as we now know. So you've been covering the area for some time. What did you know about Abiy before he came to power? And where do you think he's taking Ethiopia now, and by implication, the whole region?
Well, Abiy came to power not because of his capabilities. He came to power, why? Because there was a reaction against TPLF. Everyone in Ethiopia wanted to remove TPLF. Protests in Oromia, led by Jawar, others, broad coalition developed. EPRDF, led by TPLF, had to go. So their first target of protesting Ethiopians was to remove TPLF. And since the struggle was launched by Oromos, mainly protests were held in Oromo, that is why from Oromia Democratic Party, a leader was made the Prime Minister for transitional period. And he was part of Oromia Democratic Party, which was part of EPRDF, by the way, before the before removal of TPLF from Addis Ababa. So he was part of the ruling elite. It's not that he launched a public movement, he toppled EPRDF alliance. He was part of the political elite which was ruling the country before TPLF's removed from Addis Ababa. His coming to power was a reaction against TPLF. Now, when TPLF has become a weaker force in Ethiopia politically, a new struggle has started between Oromos and Amharas. Amharas see him as representative of Oromos. They believe that he is implementing greater Oromia project, that he wants to put Oromos in top positions. So now we're seeing some mistrust between Amhara elite and PM Abiy. Can he create unity? Did he create divisions? I think what is needed is a holistic, comprehensive approach in Ethiopia with involvement of all players to agree on some common ground to progress towards future, which is missing. Amharas ruled for decades. Then Tigrayans came to power in 1991 through EPRDF. And now Oromos see that they have a chance now. Amhara is resisting. Tigrayans trying to regain their lost clout. So it's a very interesting situation. And a new alliance could be formed between Oromos and Tigrayans. So what is needed is some democratic, transparent power sharing between these groups, between the regions and federation, to agree on their common goal. So far, it's not happening. PM Abiy could not create unity. We cannot deny that. But as I said earlier, like Eritrea is in transitional mode, same is happening in Ethiopia. After TPLF, a new scenario is unfolding. How will PM Abiy behave in this post-TPLF scenario? Will he emerge as a visionary leader who could work for a bright future? We'll have to wait and see. But in Ethiopia, a new political alliance will emerge in coming months. And so far, what can be said about PM Abiy's performance is that at least he's discouraging ethnic-based politics. So at the same time, on some issues, he's backing the group from which he is Oromos. Overall, it's a very difficult situation. It's difficult to predict what's going to happen. PM Abiy himself perhaps knows that he is fighting on multiple fronts. He cannot lose his Amhara allies. At the same time, his power base is Oromia. How will he handle all these challenges? And by the way, if you remove PM Abiy, who will replace him? Do you see anyone in Ethiopia who has this capability to keep all the groups united, who has the trust of all the groups? There are not many. I don't see lots of people. So they'll have to settle for PM Abiy for the time being and maybe start some dialogue to find common ground, I think.
How about your views on the alliances between Abiy and Isaias? I mean, the last few years, they were really very close. Now, I think Isaias seems to be shifting towards the Amharas. So do you think the alliance between Abiy and Isaias is weakening or staying the same?
The alliance was on one issue, and that was to weaken or to dismantle TPLF. So they joined because TPLF was their common enemy, if it's the right word. As long as TPLF is a threat to them, they'll keep themselves united. But once TPLF has been neutralized as a party or has been weakened as a party, you will see issues. Though while I'm recording this video, talking to you, you're recording this video, I don't see any serious issues between Abiy and Isaias. Because still the implementation of Pretoria deal is ongoing. A lot is going to happen. Amhara Isaias alliance is ongoing for some time. Eritrean government is training Amhara militias. Eritrean government is not ready to form any lasting economic relationship with Ethiopia. So it's a period where the two are considering what to do next, whether to trust each other for lasting relationship or just remain confined to the extent of weakening TPLF. So maybe in future, in coming months, we'll see. So far, they're on the same page. We have not seen any signs of fracturing of their relations, I think.
Yeah. Finally, Sajid, your views on Somaliland, for a couple of reasons. Somaliland has been the only center of sanity, inspiration really, in the whole area, because although it's not recognized by the international community, it has maintained a peaceful existence for the last 3 decades. So number one, why do you think it was as peaceful as it was while the whole region was in all kinds of turmoil? And secondly, unfortunately, there are reports now that suggest that Somalia's instability may be encroaching into Somaliland as well. So if you can comment on both those, and we'll end there.
I think Somaliland was peaceful because it was the most democratic area in the Horn of Africa. Robust opposition, government, healthy relationship, then very smooth transition of power. But things deteriorated last year when election was delayed. I think in November last year, election was due to be held, but election was delayed. The Musibai Abdi election commission, they said they were not in a position to hold the election. Election has been delayed, and we are seeing tensions between the opposition and the government. So that peaceful transition has gone wrong in Somaliland, which was the hallmark of this democracy. That is why it was peaceful. Somaliland dialogue has been held in the past, but the two sides could not agree. And we are seeing a new conflict now in Sul region, in Lassanud, where Lassanud fighters, Dulbahante tribal fighters, they're fighting against Somaliland's forces. Hundreds have been killed there. Somaliland is accusing Ethiopia. It is accusing Portland, neighboring region of Somalia. And sometimes it accuses Mogadishu that Mogadishu is interfering. Overall, things are not going in the right direction in Somaliland since last year. Due to failed holding of election, due to this tribal conflict, which has a tribal color too, and foreign actors arriving in Somaliland too. US is establishing a permanent base in Berbera, I think. So what is needed is, first of all, is holding of election. Genuine, credible election, transparent, like it was held in the past in Somaliland. The only country which was an inspiration for the self-declared country. Transition has gone wrong. We're seeing problems. And neighboring countries are trying to play a role. In Addis Ababa, they held some meetings. A week ago, did a video on that. But so far, no solution regarding the problem in Lasanud, in Ethiopian neighborhood.
Yeah. So the key really is, like you said, democracy and peaceful transition of elections. Don't delay them. So, thank you, Sajid. I really, really appreciate your insights. I hope you will come back another time. Until then, all the best, and thank you.
Thank you, Tivalda. Thank you for having me. Yes, I'll be happy to be here again on this show. Thank you. Bye.
ኤሪሳት ድምፂ ውፅዓት
ዑደት ሳተላይት ቴለቪዥን ኤሪሳት ናብ ሃገረ ካናዳን ሕቡራት መንግስታት ኣሜሪካን ከም ማእከላይ ናይቲ ኣብ ኣሜሪካ ዝገበርናዮ ዑደት ኤሪሳት ኣብ ሓንቲ ከተማ ሕቡራት መንግስታት ኣሜሪካን ኣብ 3 ከተማታት ካናዳን ማለት ዊኒፒግ ሚያዝያ 22 ሚኒያፖሊስ ሚኔሶታ 23 ሚያዝያ ኤድመንተን ሚያዝያ 19 ከምኡ ድማ ኣብ ቶሮንቶ ሚያዝያ 30 2023 ዑደት ክንገብር ኢና ኩልኩም ደለይቲ ፈትሒ ኣብዘን ከተማታትን ከባቢኡን ዘለኹም ኣብቲ ንገብሮ ናይ ይህን መድረኽ ምሳና ሓቢርኩም ክትውዕሉ ብኽብር ንዕድም ብድሓን ምፁ ሳተላይት ቴሌቪዥን ኤሪሳት
ብማዕርነት ኩሉ ንኩሉ ሳቲፋ ስኑት ፍትሒ ሰላም ሓድነት ሓቂፋ ኣንፈት ከተማእዝን ራእይ ከተሰስን ድምፅኹም ስምዕዋ መቓልዕ ኩንዋ ኤሪሳት